And we're live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the ERMAC monthly event, our webinar. And my name is Deborah Henderson, and I work with ERMAC as the former president. And I'll be your facilitator again today. This is our every third Wednesday of every month webinar, and happy to see you all online. ERMAC is also co-branded as DAMA Toronto, and so we're everything about data. In fact, our motto is love the data. Our meeting today, we're happy to welcome George Furican, and he's an exuberant advocate of the importance of data, as we are all here, and frequently a conference speaker, and he has his own YouTube site as well. I'll point you to that, and we'll put it in the description below, so you can go visit George and his presentations. He's ranked among the top 10 global thought leaders and influencers on digital disruption, and a top 15 on innovation and big data. His innovative approach to data management received international recognition through award-winning program and project implementations in data governance, data quality, business intelligence, and data analytics. In his spare time, he loves to create informative, practical, and engaging educational content and help organizations get more visibility on social media. He's the founder of lightsondata.com. We'll also be putting information about lightsondata.com in the description. So today he'll be talking about 3 pillars of successful data governance program. And I'll let George take it from here.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you so much for a lovely introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here and such a pleasure to walk you through these 3 pillars of a successful data governance program implementation. So I'll start sharing my screen now and get this on the way. And I'm glad that I don't have to talk about myself anymore, as again, it was a lovely introduction. I am a data governance practitioner at heart and in practice, so I've been doing this for 10 plus years. So if you want to look more into my past activities, current experience, and so forth, please feel free to check me out. As it was mentioned, I do love data governance, data management, data in general. So as much as possible, I do try and help you with your data governance and data management questions and challenges. And I do that through my lightsondata.com website, where I post articles and templates and online courses, white papers, so forth and so on. Or if you prefer content in video format, please feel free to check out my Lights on Data YouTube channel, or just get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I love really connecting with new people, learning from one another. And I promise, I do post a lot of stuff there as well. You will not be disappointed. But let's try and turn the focus on you. I mean, in a figurative way, and maybe from a work perspective, you're this one individual sitting by the side of the lake, having the raindrops on your head as you're kind of staring into that abyss. And the reason why you're staring into the abyss, or you might be, is because you're contemplating, where can you find the data that you need, right? And if you do find it, what does it really mean? What are you allowed to do with this data in the first place? Where did it come from? What is that data lineage? What is the process for disseminating the data? And can you really trust it if you want to use it? Or maybe from, let's say, management perspective, you're kind of sitting there thinking, why am I getting all these 3 different reports about the same thing, but with different results? Or do these key metric performance are really meaning the same things? Why can't you get a single view of your customer? How can we reduce the procurement cost, as an example? How can we increase the satisfaction rate of our customers? And a bunch of other questions. This is really just something that I hear a lot from managers, from people working with data, from people that do need to consume data. And to be truthful, the answer to all these questions really resides in data governance. And the reason why is because data governance is really this discipline that provides all data management practices with that necessary foundation strategy, structure that's needed to ensure that data is managed as an asset truly, and then of course transformed into meaningful information, because we don't want just to manage data for the sake of managing data. We want to derive some meaning out of it, some information out of it. And as Dama is really putting it, its data governance kind of sits at the center of all these different data management areas, these different data management knowledge areas, as they call them. It's really an enabler and a connector to ensure that all these data management practices come together, work together. So the way I kind of like to think about data governance really is to first look at finance and HR. Why? Because traditionally, organizations really see these two important assets: people and financial assets, and intellectual properties, so forth and so on. But really, it's HR and finance as sort of the main ones. And HR is really managing people as those assets, and the finance department managing the financial assets as those real assets. And the way I see data governance, and if you remember anything from this presentation, I want you to remember this. The way that I see data governance is that it gives you that key into opening a world where data is also managed as an asset, the way that people are, financial assets are also being managed. And it's doing that by providing you with that strategy, guidance, procedures, policies, establishing ownerships, and understanding what stakeholders you have in place, what technology you need to enable in order to do so, to manage data as an asset. The problem is that when you're first looking into data governance, trying to learn what it is, what you should tackle first, where to start, kind of looks like this, right? It's the first impression that a lot of us that are diving into data governance are getting it. The fact that it can be complex. There's all these different wires that you don't know where they start, where they end. There are all these dependencies between them, which one is still working, which one is not. Plus, you're kind of afraid of getting in there, not being electrocuted. And the truth is, there are a lot of facets to data governance. There's different ways to tackle it. There are even multiple definitions on data governance, which I do find a bit ironic, because that's one of the things that data governance is trying to facilitate, right? Less ambiguity, better understanding, one truth. And definitely there are a lot of areas, and again, different ways of tackling it. There are a lot of components and different ways of looking at data governance from a strategy perspective, the whole organization framework. How are you going to measure its success? What technology you're going to use? What policies, procedures, standards you're going to put in place? And of course, the whole change management communication aspect. So to cut it short, really the purpose of this session, and I know it's only 1 hour, but the purpose of this one session is to provide you with some practical advice that you can apply the next day at work to discern the somewhat complex program, to try and find some meaning out of this. And because of that, we're going to go over those 3 pillars that are needed in order to construct in our first year of data governance, in order then to have a successful program implementation. So the first one is how we're going to assess our environment. Second pillar is starting to lay those grounds, that foundation for our data governance program. And the third, we're going to see how we could set that initial focus and where should we set it to. So let's start with that first pillar, the assessing your environment. And the first thing that you need to ask yourself, yourself as the representatives of the organization, really, what are those drivers? Why do you need a data governance program in place? Okay, how are you trying to support the goals of your portfolio of your organization through data? And there's sort of 3 main areas that I think they're mainly the drivers of starting a data governance program or improving the one that you have. And the first one, there's some sort of a business imperative, and this is more of a, let's say, of overarching umbrella for a few drivers. So sometimes you see this stated as, we want to start a business intelligence program, or we want to do better data analytics, advanced analytics, AI, machine learning, that kind of fun stuff, right? Or we just want to harness big data, again, for these purposes, in order for us to then create some efficiencies, gain better customer satisfaction, so forth and so on. So it's more of a wider umbrella. Second one, of course, also important, is that regulatory compliance. Now, this is really affecting all organizations. There's no doubt about it. I mean, when you think about it at the lowest denominator, all organizations need to comply with their own country's financial regulations. That's one example. Then there, of course, can be region-specific data privacy regulations, some stricter than others. But non-compliance to those can also end up costing large sums of money, as well as bad publicity. For example, in the first quarter of this year, the European supervisory authorities issued at least 68 administrative fines that were totaling, I think it was about 50 million euros. That's definitely a lot of money. And that was more on the GDPR side. But there are plenty other industry specific regulations, such as HIPAA and PIPEDA, Basel, GLBA, and so forth and so on, which of course can also be country specific. And lastly, again, there are those which might not necessarily relate to your own industry, but with the interaction between you and your customers. So similar to GDPR, you have, as I mentioned, the PIPEDA, CAN-SPAM, FIPA, PCI DSS, so forth and so on. Let's not go into all those details because that's another session on its own for sure. And the reason why this tends to score high in the list of data governance drivers is because of those high risks and costs associated with non-compliance. So definitely watch out for this one. But there's another driver, and that's, let's say, data quality. And in a way, it kind of all boils down to data quality. And that's why a lot of organizations are kind of pointing towards this as their main driver. Because even those that want to start a business intelligence program or ensure regulatory compliance, become more efficient, increase customer satisfaction, and so on, they definitely need to ensure that data is clean, that data is accurate, and in agreement with the data quality dimensions that matter to the business. If you don't have good data quality, then you won't really succeed in achieving anything in those first two drivers, right? So at least in my opinion, the state of quality of your data can definitely make or break everything. And for this, you do need a good data governance program. And that's really one of the, at least intermediate drivers that you need to aim towards and really drives the need for data governance in order to achieve everything else, any other beautiful aspect of those outcomes that you want to get out of it. Second piece, what I recommend doing in this assessment is to understand and determine those main pain points. And you don't need to do a lot of in-depth analysis on this, especially if you're just trying to make a case of starting data governance. And that's why I recommend just to look at data acquisition, data maintenance, data dissemination. Start with these three and kind of see what information can you gather about this? What issues are you having with these three? And I've outlined a few examples of what these might be. For data acquisition, where it could be challenged by having multiple data sources, a lot of manual processes, the fact that there's no standards, no defined processes in place. There's a lot of redundancy, multiple ways of storing the same information. Of course, on the data maintenance side, we're kind of plagued about the same issues, not to mention the fact that there's issues in integrating all these different data sources and having the one customer view as an example. There's a lot of duplicate. Things are not timely enough. So from the time of collection to the time of actually usage, it does take quite a bit of time to get everything through. And there's no awareness of data quality efforts, if there are any. And there's definitely that lack of data accessibility overall. It's hard to, as consumers, to get our hands on it. And for the dissemination piece, again, there's no golden record. Everything is kind of bottlenecked and sitting with IT. It's not easy to repeat the same results if you're pulling the same report twice. Plus, you get all this inaccurate, bad data quality surfacing in your CRM, on your website, in your reports, data marts, what have you. And a lot of the times that data gets cleansed manually but not in a repeatable process. Everything needs to be redone over and over again. And of course, even when you are looking at those end results, there's a lack of definitions. You're looking at the customer retention rate, but you don't know if that's going to be calculated the same in a different report. And so this is just a high-level example that I'm sure you'll able to gather, and some of it might already resonate with you as you're listening through this, and you're thinking, yeah, we are suffering from these issues. So just kind of put your thoughts together, have some Q&A with stakeholders throughout your organization, and see how can you at least informally try and document some of these issues right now. And of course, then we also need to identify those main stakeholders that are involved and pertinent to the data governance program. The first and most important one, I feel, is really the program sponsor. And ideally, it's sponsors. Because the more sponsors you have, I would argue, is that the better chance of success your data governance would have. I think it's definitely best practice to have more than one sponsor. If there are 4 major lines of business, then there should be a sponsor from each line for your data governance program. Then you want to determine what are those most affected stakeholders. Who is suffering from not having a data governance program? Because you want to then target these people. You want to work with them from the start to see how can data governance help them, and how do you make it significant to them, to their own needs. And then, of course, you will also want to determine the champions, because they're already individuals, though it might not be in their role, or at least on paper. They are creating data. They're already responsible for it in some way or another. They're kind of your data stewards, but again, not officially. They're already managing from one way or another. They have knowledge about it. They really care about its quality. They do things already to ensure it. Okay, so now we have these drivers, the main pain points, and the stakeholders. And what do we do with this? We kind of put it into this one document called a business case. And this is really a document that's memorializing the business purpose of the data governance program. It really outlines those current challenges that we derived out of those main pain points, and really the reason why that data governance program is needed. Again, I always recommend to tie these back to the goals of the organization. That's really the high level, but also make it pertinent to those that would be reading the business case. So try and go all the way to the department level, and at least in your communication, not necessarily in this document, but go all the way to the individual level. What's in it for them? This is really crucial to everybody. Nobody really cares about data per se, unfortunately. I think everybody should, but they do care on, well, how would this improve my existing pain points? How would it get rid of them already? Right, so we put all this in the business case. This is also a great place to try and determine some funding that you might need, but we can talk about that later on, especially if you do have any questions around funding and ideas on how you can get funding. Please don't hesitate to ask. I'll be happy to provide some details on that. I also have videos on it already on YouTube if you're more interested in finding out more on it. Okay.
I have a question, George. It's
Yes,
Deborah
please.
Here. You said that it's important to identify your sponsors, and if you have multiple organizations and parts of your organization and the key that are keenly involved in the emerging data governance, then they should all be sponsors. Isn't there some confusion when there's more than one sponsor of who's on first and who you should go to and who's putting up the money?
Right. Well, ideally, it would be really everybody that contributes. So it's the idea that if you want to do something enterprise-wide, which is something that I recommend to not start at the department level, but from the start something that has the entire organization as an overview. And because of that, you want to ensure that you do have their representation and support from all important areas of the business. And of course, we need to understand really what are their roles. How could we determine what is the deciding factor, who decides what, where do you go for different things. And it could be that it could be so in some areas, for example, they do decide that this person is sort of the chief sponsor, if you will, and that's the ultimate veto decision maker. Or it could be that it's more of a democratic process, and that you at least need to have majority, or you actually do need to have consensus from all parties. And it works differently depending on the culture of their organization. But the reason why it's good to have more sponsors than none is because there could be aspects when one area is unable to offer that support for whatever reason. It could be that the individual from that area, that original sponsor, has left. There's somebody else coming in that might have a different perspective, and having 2 or 3 other sponsors already in place can better help you bring that fourth person on board as they're coming in, rather than if you're starting fresh every time there's some sort of a change. It will definitely be a little bit more difficult. But listen, that's one of the main issues that data governance is facing, the whole politics of it all. So that
Got
definitely
it.
plays a role. But if you can get, the idea is that with the business case, you would be bringing all these different parties on board and in agreement that yes, we do understand the need for us to support your program, or our
Mhm.
program, really, the enterprise program.
So
And
their commitment and how they're going to interact with each other and also with the program are, the details that also go into this business case.
yes, it depends. Usually, they want to see something a bit more high level, and then once you start setting up that data governance operational framework, if you will, whatever that process is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that on the Data Governance Council and their role. That can be defined and clarified to be a little bit more structured.
Great, thanks.
You're very welcome. Yeah, please don't hesitate to interrupt me with other questions. I love being on the edge as well with these, and I'm happy that I can answer them too. So the main message that comes out of this business case, the main message is really the fact that data governance is a program. It's not a project. I think this is one of the mistakes that a lot of organizations make. They refer to it as a project and they treat it as a project. The difference being is that a project has an end date, but our data governance program needs to be here to stay. The other part of the message is that it's definitely a support mechanism for the business to address, all these pain points and other data pain points that maybe we haven't uncovered yet, and enable the organization to achieve its goals through the usage of data. All right. Next step in starting your data governance program, it's what I recommend. It's not mandatory, but it's to put together a scope document. So not that mouthwashing scope, but a scope document. And the reason why I like it is I do come from a project management background, so I do like a bit more of a structured, documented approach to things. And I feel that when we do put things on paper, or our virtual paper, we have a bit more clarity on what's to come and what things we should watch out for. And that for that reason, the scope document should include, the governance program's purpose, what are some of the objectives and benefits, again, in some way rehashing some of the items from the business case, but in a little bit more detail, outlining some of the assumptions and dependencies, risks, and success factors that we want to include and adhere to. And I recommend, sorry, to have at least 1 year of the project and activities and deliverables in there. It could be 6 months, it could be 1 year, and of course, this will be a living document as things are progressing and changing. You would want to update this list. I've seen organizations which think more on a 3 or even 5 year timeline, and that can work as well. But just to know that obviously in our day and age, things are very volatile, as you know already. So things can definitely change from 1 month to another, if not from one day to another. So having things that go 3 years, 5 years down the line, it's good to have, but at a more high level and with the agreement that things can really change and those objectives are not put in stone. So my favorite part is starting this data governance council. Is it always called a data governance council? No, you can call it whatever you want it to be called. I've seen data governance committee, data governance ownership group. There's so many different varieties. Really, the name is not that important. What's important is what representatives, what members it should have. That's one part that's important. I'll then cover the rest. So you definitely want to have those sponsors in there. Absolutely. You know, it kind of think of it as the executive level of your data governance organization. And that's why you need to have those executive sponsors in there, right? And of course, as with most things, it really depends on your own culture and industry, but definitely have those executive sponsors. You would also should have some sort of a data governance lead. They're usually called data governance manager. It could be a CDO, chief data officer. You know, that's a fancy and great title and great function to have in your organization. But whatever you call them, usually it's the main person that kind of leads this data governance implementation, comes up and is aware of all these best practices that they and expertise that they bring to the table when it comes to data governance. Then you'd also have a chair. Sometimes they're the same person as the data governance lead, but you definitely do need to have this chair to conduct these meetings that the council is coming together for. Now, I would also say that it's not necessarily for the chair to be the same person as the lead. And a lot of times I'm actually seeing for the chair to be some sort of an external mediator. And really, regardless who it is, just kind of state how this person is appointed. And usually they are appointed by the sponsors of the data governance program. And why it's good to have a mediator is because, as I mentioned, there's can be some political friction, actually a lot of political friction at times. So it's good to have somebody that's impartial and can bring a fresh perspective into these meetings. Ideally, you would also have a scribe that would be able to take meeting notes and things like that. That's more maybe going into too much details. Then, of course, you would have some key business stakeholders and, of course, IT. Let's not forget about IT. One thing that I'll mention later is that data governance is not an IT function. So many times it gets slotted under IT just because, well, there are a lot of reasons why, but it should not be an IT function. It's really a business function. That being said, IT is definitely an important partner and a must-have partner to have at the table in order to provide their own views from a technical perspective. If you have any questions on this, again, please don't feel shy to interrupt me. Other really best practices that I've noticed from other organizations that I would recommend anybody in any data governance program to have for their data governance council is to have some sort of a terms of reference. So you need to sort of set the expectations for these members. Their time is valuable, as it's all of ours, but they need to be made aware of what their responsibilities are. What is their expectation to meet? You know, is it once a month? And usually, by the way, you should start with once a month meetings in the first 6 months. If you're a public institution, governmental institution, maybe still every month, but for the first 12 months, just because things tend to go a little bit slower. And then maybe just move on a quarterly basis. That's just one piece that I do see often. So again, that meeting attendance expectation, what is that meeting agenda? What is its format? What are those voting requirements? How are we going to document issues and bring new items to the table? How are the notes going to be captured? So all these little minute details, but all of these things, even though they might not be crucial, they do contribute to a more successful data governance council function. You would also need to have some sort of a guiding principles, and there are usually about 10 or so that I do recommend. The overall idea is that, hey, we do see data as a strategic asset. We want to achieve that single source of truth. We want to comply with all these requirements, legal requirements, industry standards, or internal policies. We want to have a common verbiage and vocabulary of our data and business terms. And we want to obviously set and adhere to data quality standards. And there's a few others, but that's sort of the gist. I think these 5 encompass most of them. And then you want to make it clear, again, what are those roles and responsibilities? And to simplify things, you just want to have the Data Governance Council not do too much work. There's a lot of people that are joking that a council doesn't do any work. But really, in essence, this body really sets the strategic direction for what the data governance program needs to accomplish and when it needs to accomplish it. And then you would have the data governance lead determining how it should be accomplished, if that makes sense. That's sort of the main difference between a data governance lead and this data governance council. And I think this is very, very crucial to remember, is that the council also ensures that everyone knows about data governance and that it gets and continues to get and receive the support that it needs. So communication is a very important aspect of the responsibilities of the Data Governance Council's members. All right. Please, again, let me know if you do have any questions on all of these. Sometimes I'm going in a little bit of detail here. Sorry, Nick, I noticed that you...
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't really have many questions because you're giving this like fascinating, everything you're saying makes so much sense. Like the founding blocks of communication, of just the idea that you have to get down your meeting schedules and your attendance expectations. Like those are the things that you need to make something functional. And I just wanted to say it's fascinating.
Thank you. And, again, obviously this is just, part of it. There's a lot more that needs to be put in place, but definitely this is something that needs to be put in place in the first 6 months of the creation of that data governance program, after enabling its creation, if you will. So once you at least have this in place, the idea is to decide what should you focus on. As I mentioned, there's so many different areas to tackle. What do you focus on? And that's why we're going to use what we've already put together in our scope document, where we're outlining, rehashing what those drivers are, what are we trying to accomplish, what are those main pain points. And we, as maybe a data governance lead that are helping putting this document together, and maybe if we're lucky with the help of some business analysts as well, system analysts, IT, and of course, all the major stakeholders that we've interacted with in order to gather this information. And again, at this point, it's still high level, but hopefully we kind of have an idea of what should we focus on. But it should not be IT nor the data governance lead that makes this decision. And that's why we sort of present these main items back to that data governance council committee, whatever you call it. Why? Because it's really the business. It's really the business that needs to have ownership over that data governance piece. It's them that should decide, well, from a business perspective, this is what we are voting on, this is what we are agreeing on, that we should focus on in the next few months. And there's a lot of different areas that we can focus on. But I do want to mention some key learnings first, because this is something that I've seen often. And I think this is a very important message to get across. And the fact that an organization can build a data governance program by structuring it in 3 different ways. One, by domain or subject area, and I'll give you a few examples on that. So actually, these are kind of the nouns of your organizations. So things like customer, product, equipment, vendor, supplier, location, party or constituent, account, legal. There's a bunch of them. Usually between maybe an organization would have between 5 and I would say 11 to 15 such domains. Okay, and yes, domains could also have subdomains and things like that, but that's another conversation. So to give you an example, party would have a subdomain such as employee or third party or charity or foundation, I guess in Canada, government agency. So there will be different subsections of this domain. But these domains are definitely something of significance about which the enterprise, the company, wishes to store information. And that's why, so persons, places, events, objects, or concepts about which data can be stored and collected in the first place and have data created for them. Yes.
Quick question.
Yes.
One of our watchers on the stream is wondering if data stewards should be on the Data Governance Council.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And again, there's different operational models that you can tackle this. But yes, I do recommend. The reason why I haven't included the data stewardship piece is because we only have 1 hour. So that's another different topic that maybe we can cover at one point. But as part, yes, I think those main stakeholders that I mentioned, ideally, part of those main stakeholders, you would have what I call the chief data stewards. And the chief data stewards would come from all these different lines of business, or even better, all these different domain subject areas. And I'll get to that in a second, but ideally you would structure your data stewardship program in such a way that you are segmenting your data based on these data domains and not based on lines of business and business functions. So yes, at the data governance committee council level, you have these chief data stewards, and then they would bring in their own views and their own feedback to and from their data stewardship working groups that they're basically leading. And that's a completely separate structure that we would have in place.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. So, right, so I think we've clarified the domain subject area. Another way of structuring that data governance program is, again, by line of business, by department. So you basically have a data governance that's focused on finance, one that's focused on operations, another one that's focusing on marketing, sales, so forth and so on. And lastly, it could also be structured by application. Okay, so we're governing our CRM. We want to have this data governance program in place because we're implementing an ERP, and we want to govern the data that resides and uses or gets disseminated by this ERP. Now, the order in which I've laid these out from left to right is really the order of preference on what you should pick and follow. So I would say that from my experience from interacting with plenty of organizations, they tend to organize by line of business, so that middle one. And that's because it's easy. I mean, they're already working together. It's already structured in that way. It's easier to understand. There's not too many politics involved. You already know your own department. You kind of know where you stand. You know all these people. You know how you're working with them. So the difficult personalities that maybe you want to avoid or address, it's just really easier. But going that route, I think it will never really become an enterprise data governance program. That's sort of the challenge. The worst case would be to treat it by application. And if you do treat it by application or even by line of business, there will be so many things that you would be missing out on, because it's hard to get an enterprise perspective on that data when you're just looking from the narrow view of an application or just a department itself. And it's fine, I guess, if that's how things are starting in the beginning. You got to start somewhere. But soon you need to make that transition and look at it from an enterprise perspective and try and look at it from these domain subject areas. So look at the customer data domain, look at the product data domain, because in it, you will have all these different lines of business. You'll have all these different applications that consume or created the data or maintain it. So you do want to have all these different views and requirements in place to resolve all these different issues, because otherwise you're going to make a decision at that application level or from an application point of view, or from a one single business line of business point of view, which would have a negative impact on another application, on another department. It's not really going to get us anywhere. All right. Okay, so
George?
that's really the main, yes.
Sorry. One thing that I found is that a data governance program can start with the strongest sponsor or the lowest hanging fruit or some other kind of political or operational bias. And I'm wondering how you can frame that up into one of these three buckets.
Yeah, so, and as I mentioned, that's really what I see the most often, that it goes through that one sponsor that represents one line of business. And it's also because it's simpler that way, right? The problem is, Deborah, with that, is that in the long run, you're losing out a lot of resources because you're starting to already implement some workflows, you're putting together some definitions, some standards that only or mostly focus on that line of business to meet that sponsor's objectives. And the problem is, as soon as you start to integrate another one, you have to redo that work. And
Okay.
it's so much more challenging to redo things and to make all these changes. Now there's already technical implementations that have been done because of those decisions or those policies that have been put in place. So it's definitely a lot more challenging. And it also starts in the long run, in the first maybe couple of years or so, also because there wouldn't be as much awareness on the data governance program enterprise-wide. There will be more awareness about it at that department level or that line of business level. Once that word kind of gets out, it starts creating some friction, because other lines of business why weren't we included from the start? And this is no good. This doesn't represent my needs. And this is why. This is, it's not going to work out. We got to do something about it. And it's harder to make that change and also get them on board to support these initiatives. And they kind of see it like, oh, here's another thing that they've done without consulting us, and now we need to do all this work. And they already I think they lose trust in it. So that's sort of my view, and from my interaction and with other data governance leads and consultancies, it's definitely one of those main recommendations that is being given to, when possible, look at the from a domain perspective, subject area perspective. And yes, it's definitely a lot more work up front, but in the long run, you get a lot more benefits out of it.
Right.
All right. Thank you for that question. It's definitely a challenge. And as I mentioned, I think it's one of the greatest challenges when you're putting together a data governance program. First, to actually get that enterprise level buy-in, it's definitely a challenge. I mean, mind you, it's challenging just to get a department level buy-in, but enterprise level, yeah, we need, that's exponentially harder. And then once you do that, again, dealing with those political challenges that come in place. But that's why it's good to have this structure and laying out these foundations and laying out these expectations from the start and seeing how we are going to tackle these challenges as they come about. So setting that initial focus, now that we got this sort of clear that we should focus on a domain if possible, at least if we want something that's enterprise-wide and not just with a particular focus. Something that will serve the entire organization, not just one department. And here are some few ideas that you can focus on in the first 6 months. Putting together some of those standards and policies. And by the way, the whole thing is just select 2 to 3 data domains to start. Select customer, product, and location. Those are the most popular ones to start. Also because there are quite a few low-hanging fruits in some of these that you can pick and choose. So start putting some standards and policies that relate to those domains, come up with those data quality metrics, Business glossary, this is something that even if you don't have a data governance program, I recommend investing into building one yourself. Even if you start in Excel, the tool is not as important in the beginning. It does become important once you have, 100 or so more terms in there. But it's definitely important to get some clarity on what do we mean by customer, what do we mean by, what was that example that I gave before, the customer retention rate. You need clarity on what these terms mean, how do they get calculated. Then you actually want to invest a little bit into an as-is assessment. Where do we actually stand with all these different data management areas, data governance areas? And then where do we want to be? Where do we want to get to the next step? So we could do that gap analysis and see what should we tackle first. And this is where a data governance maturity model comes and helps out, because it can provide you with that quick overview of, well, based on your description, your situation, this is the level that you're at. And in order to be at the next level, these are the areas that you should tackle first. Maybe it's mentioned that you should put together standards and policies before you're putting together data quality metrics. Of course, we would have data quality processes that go hand in hand with these, identify those owners and stakeholders. So that's where we can also include the data stewardship piece. You would have data governance workflows. And again, that's another whole topic about it. I definitely recommend at least creating an inventory of your systems and applications. And you know what, especially for mid to large organizations, there's a lot of applications that are being used that not everybody knows about them. And definitely IT might not even know about them. So depending on how centralized or decentralized or federated you are as an organization, there's a lot of things that you could be missing. So it's great to at least start with documenting what these systems are, who's responsible for them, and what data they're gathering and consuming. It's a great way to put into that as assessment, see where you stand, and then you can identify redundancies, see how you can implement these data quality processes that integrate with these platforms, applications, so forth and so on. Data classification, that's another big important aspect to have, to try and see where really do you have PI data, where do you have personal information, where do you have confidential data, and why? Because then you need to put in different risk mitigations in place to really reduce that chance of getting fines or getting in trouble because of it, because of misusage. Ideally, you'd also put together a data model that, again, it's based on the data domain. So what is that customer data model? And my other two favorites, the data dictionary and the data catalog, which is more on the technical side. The data dictionary piece, you would have basically one data dictionary per system or per database. And then you would have a data catalog that kind of ties it all together, the data dictionary and the business glossary, to, let's say, provide a self-serve solution for data consumers, usually business intelligence professionals and data scientists, data analysts. What I do recommend out of really all of this, look into metadata management. Okay, look into these three areas: business glossary, data dictionary, data catalog. You can start with the foundation once you have that data governance program in place, because I think it really gives you that technical backbone of your data governance program. 80% of what data stewards do, since somebody was asking about that, 80% of what they do really is to work with metadata, technical metadata, and more even business metadata. And 20% of it is really the data itself. Okay, so just to clarify what the differences are, I have a whole other presentation on this. I have a course on this actually on business glossaries. But the business glossary, it's really that collection of business terms that has their unique definitions and a bunch of other useful related information. The data dictionary is repository of information about data that provides the description of a data element and its technical metadata for the most part. And again, the data catalog is something that's more enterprise-wide and provides a single reference source for the location of any data set that's required for, again, various needs, usually AI, analytics, BI needs. and it's curated information, so you can usually trust this data. A good example of a data catalog is open data, though a bad example of a data catalog is open data because a lot of that data is not that clean. And in your organization, it should be, or at least state what that data quality factor and level metric is. So to recap, we do need to put together that assessment in order to build a business case, and then lay the foundations for your data governance program by ensuring you do have that sponsorship, that you do have your data governance council, that you do have that scope document in place that would outline and set the direction on what should we focus on for the first 6 months to 1 year, ideally. Now, I want to, before I part ways with you and take any questions if there are any, I want to give you some quick lessons learned. And there's a lot more than these, but I am running out of time. Again, the first one is the fact that it is a program. It's not a project. We do need to treat it as a program. And for that, we do need continuous support and investment in it. It's something that never stops. The fact that it's not IT, it's really the business that needs to own this program. We also need to make sure that we're not going to boil the ocean. As I mentioned, there's so many different areas to tackle first. So let's just build step by step. It will just keep on evolving. It will just keep on progressing. So we need to keep up with that. Better to start building something than not build anything at all. And most often with data governance, we're in this limbo that there's so much stuff to take in, so many things that we need to deal with and tackle that we don't do anything at all. And of course, it's also because there are political challenges. And that's why we do need that strong executive sponsorship. We need a great framework on to how to handle these issues. How are we going to catalog a data quality issue, for example? What is the process of raising it and resolving it and addressing it? And of course, we also need a strong change management program in place, because it's definitely a lot about communication. That will be my last advice, lesson learned. But before that, we also need to not forget to measure success. I think so many times, especially as data governance practitioners, we're very enthusiastic of getting something off the ground that we forget to measure. We forget to take that baseline initially on what is the state that we're in right now. And we already start making some changes, making some upgrades, putting some processes in place, maybe cleansing some data, saying some stewards, defining some business terms, putting together that data governance council. We're just so excited about it that then we forget to take the baseline, so then we can measure against it and see how did we progress and how do we show that progression to our stakeholders, because they do need to be informed. We need to communicate with them constantly. We need to communicate what we have done, what we are doing, what we are going to do. And again, back to one of my points before, is why are we doing this? What's in it for them? How does it tie in to their goals and to the enterprise goals? So thank you so much for listening. I hope that you've learned something. And as always, again, please feel free to get in touch with me. I really enjoy meeting new people in person or online and listening to your feedback and sharing ideas and information. Please feel free to check out lightsondata.com, where I offer a lot of resources. Also, these two courses, one on how to create an award-winning business glossary, another one on data governance maturity models. And there's a lot of maturity models that I do cover. As long as you do have a data governance program or you want to start one, this is definitely one of the courses for you. And as a special, I'm offering this 20% off. Just use this coupon code at checkout, and you'll benefit from the discount by September 30th. So again, thank you so much for having me. If there are any questions, be happy to answer them now, or just again reach out to me on LinkedIn afterwards.
Wow, thank you, George. Not only was that a great and informative session on data governance fundamentals 1, 2, 3, but also to have this 20% off just for ERMAC available till the end of the month on your courses. That's a wonderful bonus. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do have a question here, going back to your presentation about issue management. I find that during the scoping, during the interviewing, doing the whole assessment, people are very eager to complain about things in that discovery. And you start writing notes about what their particular issues are. And, where does that issue management go? Because there has to be a prioritization. Again, you can't boil the ocean. Is that where you find the Data Governance Council a great place to prioritize?
Exactly. And again, us as data governance practitioners, working with the analysts maybe to put together that issue log, if you will, could already start seeing some themes, right? And some overlap into those issues. And I think we could also discern, again, with the help of our stakeholders, to understand what are some more pressing pain points. There's also different ways of categorizing it. So you could have a different scoring system depending on what that impact is. What is the severity, timeliness of the issue. So there's different metrics, dimensions that you can apply to it to help you prioritize it. But I think even without that, we could sort of discern what are maybe some of the, let's say, top 10 issues that are pressing right now, and understand, well, this is a big issue, but it's also going to take 6 months to get it done. Or this is sort of a medium issue, but we could do it within 2 days. And with that information, presenting that back to the Data Governance Council, providing them with these estimates and some sort of a high-level issue description for them to decide what we should focus on. And to be honest, at times they will ask the data governance practitioner, well, what is your recommendation? And you'd be happy to provide that to them. But on paper, it's definitely the council that has the final say and the decision. Because if there's any complaints at one point is, well, why haven't we focused on something else? Why do we focus on this line first? Well, it's because the business agreed that that's what it was important to them at the time. It should not be you as the data governance practitioner that makes this decision, if that makes sense.
Great point. It should be management or senior management at the table in the Data Governance Council. So
absolutely,
that everything can be smoothed over in terms of what gets the priority, because there's so many competing voices and issues. As you said, it's there's just so much to focus on. There's just so much to do.
Absolutely.
Right. Is there something from the floor, Nick?
I don't have anyone in the comments except for one lovely person who said it was an excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you so much.
I was also just going to say, one of the things that I've heard from someone who's gone through a lot of data governance positions is the hardest part is just getting people on board with why it's important. And that's why I definitely imagine getting that senior executive or someone on the Data Governance Council who actually has your back probably goes a really long way in those kinds of situations.
It does, especially if they're liked. If they're a good, true leader, then that's definitely very helpful.
Right. Yeah.
Then
thank you very much again, George, for your time. This has been really great. From an ERMAC point of view, you've got that great offer on the screen here. Write it down, guys. And for our next meeting, which is October the 21st, again, the third Wednesday of the month, we'll be having Natalia Modjeska, a PhD and research director at Infotech, and she'll be talking about biases in machine learning. Another really great topic that we'll dive into. So thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you all again next time. Bye for now.